IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Welcome to Think Fast, where we're trying to kill birds to make sure this show happens. Also, that is what happened before the start of this episode. We had to delay recording this because there is a bird chirping outside Suchita's window. The only options were shoo the bird away or better, kill it. We decided not to do either, and hence the start of this episode has happened. What else are you doing, Suchita, other than killing birds these days?
These are the perks of living in Delhi. We have trees, greenery.
I have metro construction.
Animals around on the roads, but on the trees. Oh my God, perks of living in Delhi.
I can hear amazing drilling noises from the outside. Soothing, monotonous drilling noises of the metro being made. That's what
guys, this is to gently remind you, you can be as bougie as Varun is, but Bombay will still be Bombay, and you will still have.
I think it's time I moved. I want to move to I think I actually want to go to. I've always wanted to go to Timbuktu. Should I move to Timbuktu? What is the name? Timbuktu.
Great. You know who is going to Timbuktu? All the funding for startups, because it's definitely not getting pumped into any companies at all. No, but dude, winter is here, man. If you and not that I open Twitter as much as I used to. Has this happened with you as well? It's like my Twitter consumption has purposely
gone down. Gone up.
It has. Oh, I'm so sick of this
mine's actually
Elon
gone up
rubbish.
a lot more.
Oh man, Elon doing his thing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Elon fanboying happening out there. But I think what's also interesting is that over time, I don't know why my Twitter feed, maybe it's because of the stuff I was consuming, has become a lot better. There obviously are those fanboys that I've been staying away from those tweets. So I go on Twitter quite often, actually. But speaking of Twitter, I don't know if you saw the article, which I just managed to read right before we hit record. He's got a lot of funding from some very interesting places to be able to make his bid come through.
But again, all individuals, like the Binance guy or Binance itself is participating. But all individuals, no Goldman Sachs / Morgan Stanley, no bank is.
I think the Saudi Wealth Fund and Sequoia there as well, by the way.
Interesting. I didn't realize the Saudi Wealth. Dude, I don't know if I take money from the Saudi Wealth Fund.
Everybody's taking money from the Saudi Wealth Fund.
Remember the last time, what had happened? Oh yeah, the Saudis were behind the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Who pretty much stood for free speech and what Elon Musk, apparently stands for with Twitter. So, but again, keeping what you invest in and what you believe in aside, I suppose that's what the Saudi Wealth Fund is doing.
Let me recheck that though, the Saudi Wealth Fund part. It was a wealth fund for sure. Let me just reconfirm that as we go through this episode. But what's been happening this week? What's been happening this week?
Oh my God, dude. Apart from people basically stressing everyone out with layoff news and winter is coming and startup news and this, that and the other. Some brighter, shinier news is first and foremost, the troll of all trolls, a Swiggy guy apparently has been making deliveries in Bangalore using Dunzo, which I think is as peak Bangalore as it gets. I thought this was genius, by the way. This is the kind of shit I can imagine you doing, Varun. If you were a Swiggy guy.
Yes, if I was a Swiggy guy, I would do that.
So that happened. Spotify apparently has become the first music streaming service on Roblox, which is great because tech is getting integrated into gaming and vice versa. I think one really good news of the week was John Doerr Stanford actually has a new school which has been created after 70 years. And the school is a school of sustainability, predominantly focused on all things climate and climate change, if I'm not mistaken. So the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability is, one big good news in the week. Obviously, for those of you who follow international news, everyone is understandably, myself included, very, very upset about this possible overturning of Roe v. Wade, which for those of you who are uninitiated was a landmark sort of, judgment that upheld abortion rights and just reproductive rights, for women. So there's a lot happening over there. But, closer to India, turmoil at Zilingo continues because apparently one of their other employees is a lady called Noshaba Salahuddin, who headed communication. She's been suspended very, very abruptly. Mix of good news, bad news, but this week generally has been slowish. Actually, how could we forget LIC, man? LIC IPO.
Yeah. I kept getting like messages, have you applied? Have I applied? I'm like, no, I have not applied. But that was pretty much what my response to this. But it's great, right? If you look at the OG insurance company in the country, it's LIC. Like we all grew up. Was there a point in your life when people have not asked you if you have an LIC policy?
Yeah,
I feel that
yeah.
since I was a child, I've been hearing LIC policy. So it's like one of those
But
things, right?
hasn't their kickoff been quite slow? Like I think I read somewhere that it's only been 3,000 CR versus Nykaa and Zomato, which were at 30,000 CR, while Zomato and Nykaa were at 2 lakh crores.
Might also show where the market's really wanting to put its money, right?
One is that, and also generally markets are cool right now, man. Delivery has their IPO that's coming up, and apparently, subscriptions are likely to open closer to the 11th of May, if I'm not mistaken. So IPO frenzy continues. Mama Earth apparently is eyeing for an IPO in 2023, but God alone knows what's going to happen because the world is topsy-turvy these days, my friend.
Yeah, and even the US markets are really going down. You see, look, some of the major tech stocks are all down as well. Crypto markets are down. So it seems to be across the board, seem to be trend. And also, I just cross-checked. It's not a Saudi wealth fund. It's a Saudi prince, who's one of the key shareholders in Twitter. Who initially said he was outraged by what Elon Musk was doing. Now saying I'm a full supporter of what Elon Musk is doing. So
and apparently, by proxy, a full supporter of free speech. But हम सबको पता है Saudi Arabia में exactly होता क्या है. But what are we talking about today, man?
I'm not getting into anything politics. Yes, but what are we talking about this week? This week, actually, we're doing a bunch of stuff around podcasts, right? Obviously, we're talking about, you're talking about how Spotify has really been able to tap into the India market really well. And some of the recent results kind of show that as well. There's also this whole trend of influencers doing podcasts, which I think is an interesting one to tap into. So we're going to it's a double-decker story, if that's the term to use for this, unless that sounds weird. Nevertheless, moving away from that quickly, you're going to get into how Wingreens is building its house of brands. And also, you're getting into, I'm getting into how good Glamm and Raymond are the best a man can be. Is that the line? Was that the line? Perfect man. What is the line for Raymond?
Brother, they're acquiring Park Avenue and Kama Sutra, not Raymond. Not like only Raymond.
No, they're not acquiring Raymond. They're acquiring the consumer care business. Which house Park Avenue and Kama Sutra? It's not just those two.
Queen. Acha, there's more. Interesting.
Complete man. There are more things there. The complete man. Yes, that's the line. See, how can I forget? I've been in advertising for too long. And finally, we're going to also get into Snapchat and their recent launch of their own drone. But it also shows an interesting trend about where Snap actually might be headed as a company. So tap into that. And beyond that, just talk about the fact that I ate 10 vadas today, right before this recording. So I am in a nice perky mood. So that's it for this episode of Think Fast. Before we go for a break, and we actually start the episode.
Where we thought you would die on your laptop
because I was dying.
Talking.
I don't know what happened last week. This is basically, it's called Kidzania. But let's not go back to Kidzania stories. Let's go to a break and we'll be right back with Think Fast.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
Welcome back to Think Fast, where I'm still dreaming of the vadas I just ate. But before I start talking about, aren't vadas the best? Like, Suchita, what do you say? Do you enjoy a good vada?
I actually haven't eaten a vada in a while. No, but I'm a big fan of South Indian food in general. Like all forms of South Indian food, right? Like coastal South Indian, your idli dosa South Indian, like you name it. I think South Indian food is bomb. But speaking of food, I actually want to kick off with the Wingreens. So ladies and gents, Wingreens is obviously, they started out. I remember they actually started out back when LBB was a Tumblr blog. So this is like, 2012, 2013. And Anju Srivastava, who's one of the co-founder, she started it as this, sort of initiative to obviously provide healthy, dips. And what was really interesting about the brand was they also provided empowerment to a lot of, women, because the makers of the dips were, women, and they started out with, hummus, peri peri, tomato salsa and the likes. And obviously since then have grown strength to strength, expanded their portfolio significantly. And I think Wingreens is to me is a very, very interesting story of one, playing it steady. And the second is also building a market, because if you think about it, when Wingreens had launched, there was no concept of dips. In fact, I was catching up with Anju recently, and she was sort of talking about how back when they had started, even if you went to like a local crockery store or open Amazon, there was no even like plating and crockery to there is no concept of chips and dips. And a lot of that has actually come up, obviously starting out with 2012 and growing from strength to strength since then. And this general space of dips, pastes, etc., has grown significantly. You've obviously got the likes of Viva, which has grown fairly well, and the slightly more older examples have been the likes of, Nissan, Nestle, Amul, and many, many, many others. But the interesting thing about Wingreens is, though they started out as a humble, hummus and dips only brand, they've expanded their portfolio significantly and have now actually transformed into a house of brands with their acquisition of Raw Pressery that happened, I think, last year or 2 years ago. And they're back in the news because they just acquired Postcard, which is a brand that I really like. So Postcard, not the hotel brand, but Postcard, the brand that sells localized snacks in the form of packaged food. So Wingreens going down the house of brands route, early thoughts?
I think this makes sense in the food space, right? If you look at how the food space, people want to acquire multiple pieces all the time in terms of as a consumer.
Yeah.
And if you tap into this as a brand, it's okay, these are things which I already have from a logistics standpoint, from, you can kind of give almost the base level logistics, base level manufacturing capabilities, etc., and put them all together. You can actually create so many of these. So it makes total sense. And the fact that they come from a certain methodology and they seem to be acquiring in that same methodology also shows that it's not random. There seems to be some science to, okay, this both culturally and product wise fit into what we stand for. And like, for instance, like Postcard, like I agree with you, like the pickles and everything else, like I've sampled those and they actually feel super authentic. They don't seem, because a lot of the other ones you would normally get would seem very synthetic. But Postcard, I know I'm a pickle buff. I collect pickles. The pickles are awesome.
Yeah, I didn't realize Postcard got into pickles because they were originally known for like local snacks, right? So they take all of these, really interesting, like, your muruku and, like your local snacks from Bihar, Rajasthan, etc., and give,
Murukus
India
are
on
the
a
best.
plate. Yeah, exactly. Like Indian snacks, sort of standardized and given to consumers. I don't know, but like what I really like about the way Wingreens is approaching it is I think they're very clear about the fact that there is not enough market depth in India for premiumized, FMCG brands. So, and I think all the steps that they've made have been in that direction of, okay, the market isn't as deep as we need it to be. But for, say, for example, the top 20, 30 million, consumers spending on FMCG in India, how do we get into more use cases within their kitchen, right? So, for example, they launched this really cool brand called Impatient Baker. And I've tried their pancake mix, which is super nice, like very, nice fluffy pancakes come off of it. So I think the really interesting thing that they're doing is that they're kind of picking up these, non-obvious niches. Like who would have genuinely thought dips would have been a big enough market, right? Especially for a country which was used to like Kisan ketchup and this, that, and the other. And then the second thing that they've also picked up is baked goods, but they're doing baked goods in a, interesting format where, they're not giving you like powder. They have a couple of different formats that they're testing and trying, which again makes their play really interesting. And similarly, Postcard isn't like your obvious snack, right? Like, I mean, Postcard, if I remember correctly, I don't think they do makhana, which is like the most obvious, or like soya chips, which is a very commoditized, snack that anyone and everyone has available. So I think what I like about their strategy is that they're picking up these niches. And from whatever I know, I think post their acquisition of Raw Pressery's growth also significantly improved. I think they've, significantly improved their costing, their packaging, their flavors of the juices that, were available. So net things seem to be sort of, coming together fairly well for them.
Yeah, even the raw pressery thing, right? I feel when you look at their portfolio of Wingreens, you also realize they're not trying to complicate things. They're not trying to overthink it and come up with newer things. Like raw pressery, if you go now, you get a lot more straight up juices. You're not getting those, they used to have Flush and Slim and some of those other ones I remember, which you have to kind of read the things saying what all it includes. Now you also get the straight up juices, which has actually been great to kind of get. They also got
Yeah.
Monsoon Harvest, right?
Yeah,
If I'm
which
just
is,
checking,
I
yeah,
am obsessed with them. Ladies and gents, if you
so
haven't,
good,
please order
so good, so
the
good.
bars and the muesli and the granola by Monsoon Harvest. It is class apart.
There's an apple and oats mostly, if I remember right, which is
Yeah.
like,
They also
yum.
have the strawberry cluster muesli, which is divine. And they also
We're
acquired
going down a
sorcery.
rabbit hole, aren't we? We're going on a rabbit hole of things we eat from Wingreens.
Oh my God. No, but just one last thing on this story and then we can get
Yeah.
on to the next one. But another really interesting thing that they've done is they've obviously made a bunch of acquisitions across, Monsoon Harvest, Sorcery, which again, does sauces as is evident in their
Yeah.
name. They've actually put it all together under an umbrella website called wingreensworld.com, which I think was launched earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken. And again, comes together so well because, and from whatever I could gather around their strategy around Wingreens World, they kind of wanted to be like the healthy big basket, right? So if you want anything, that's healthy, good for you, plus, Wingreens World becomes your destination. And I think this actually is how House of Brands should be done. I know we're going to talk about House of Brands again later on in the episode. So
Yeah.
I'm going to stop here. Over to you.
Yes. And I will take this to the other house of brands. Our longtime favorite, who we haven't spoken about for so long, Good Glam Group. Where have you been? We haven't spoken about.
Seriously.
We were the Good Glam show when this show started off. We would talk about Good Glam Group every week, saying, what did Good Glam do this week? But this week, they've actually done something which we want to talk about. So Good Glam's acquiring the consumer care business from the Raymond Group, which is going to be Park Avenue, Kama Sutra, a bunch of others. It's obviously going to be a massive one for them because they also there's a two-way here, which is basically the fact that Raymond Group gets a minority stake in the Good Glam Group as part of the deal. And but largely what I think is going to be great for this is going to give them a way to look at brick and mortar, straight up, modern trade stores and how to kind of build that into their business, which I think that almost like data and learning by itself is going to be invaluable to them. What do you think about this? What do you think? Does this make sense for Good Glam Group?
I don't know, I think it's impossible to really comment on what they're doing without really knowing how all the other acquisitions that they've made have performed. So, and also from whatever I remember, and, like I've always said, companies and founders are allowed to change their mind. But Goodlam Group's purported sort of USP was that they wanted to be a digital HUL, right? So they wanted to sort of be that, digital playground where brands are made and brands are created, and digital should be a considerable driver of, revenue for these brands. What's interesting now, one can argue that strategy by itself may not even be sound, especially if you're playing in the premium category where retail plays a significant role, like we've seen in the case of sugar. And they've been, omni through and through. And even on digital, they've done a, very good mix of marketplace as well as direct to consumer on their website. Now, bringing all of this back to Goodlam, why they're acquiring a business which is not really digital, doesn't even have significant digital presence in the sense it's not like Park Avenue and Kama Sutra are known for their Instagram or their Facebook or any amount of digital engagement at all. But I don't know. I'm a little confused by this because, like I said, if you're saying that your USP is going to be, scaling and building digital brands, how this fits into that scheme of things, I don't know if it makes sense. So I can imagine them learning a lot from this deal, but why you learning in a segment that you yourself are not saying is the mission statement of your company? I don't know. So those are my initial thoughts.
I agree with you largely as well. What I also feel is that I know that they want to get into the male grooming segment in a big way. So they obviously got Ustra, the deal's been announced, right? If I remember right.
Yeah.
Or has it not been announced yet? I've been hearing Ustra getting acquired by Good Glam for a while. I'm not sure
It's
that's
been
happened.
in the news. No one knows if it happened or not.
And on the other end, obviously, there's Park Avenue, which is like the oldest one of the lot. Been there. I mean, I don't remember when Park Avenue is. I feel like it's been there my entire lifetime. So it was definitely before my time as well. And I'm quite old. But I feel for Good Glam, you never really understand what the strategy is. Maybe that's the strategy. It's like they're fooling everybody else saying, you will never figure out what I'm planning because the plan changes. But I mean, if you compare this to other simple, you should compare this to a Nika on one end. Very clearly understand there's a certain plan. It's pretty structured in that sense. You just spoke of Wingreens. Well, here at some point, there has to be a thought about what is the joining force between all of these brands. That's still not very clear. There's a lot happening there. And that for me is the biggest problem with how this has been. I mean, how acquisitions have been added on one after the other. But you never know how these things work.
To take a cue from what you just said, like, how are all of these brands coming together? So for example, now every marketplace technically is a house of brands because most marketplaces have their own private labels. So, but that's the beauty of it, right? That it comes together, So for example, like you picked up the example of Nykaa. On Nykaa, their house of brands, quote unquote, strategy comes together on their website or their app or even their offline stores. With MyGlamm, for the life of me, I can't figure out where is all of this going to be housed. And also, if you look at the acquisitions that they've made, they're all in different universes. Like Momsco is a very different universe to Park Avenue, which is a very different universe to, just in terms of like even the type of customer or even like the use case. Like Saint Botanica is in one sort of like orbit, which again is a personal care brand that was acquired by the Glamm group last year. So I think the thing that perplexes me a little bit is if you look at anyone else and their acquisition strategy and also acquisition strategies that have worked, there usually some cohesion with respect to the type of consumer, right? Whether it's a male, male, female, whatever, right? There is some uniformity in how these plays are made. With them, there isn't a uniformity in TG. And even if you look at their content bets, right? Like whether it's PopXO or Scoop Whoop and all, it's very like diverse, consumer profiles as well on the internet. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what the lowest common denominator amongst all of their acquisitions is yet. I think the larger question to ask, and I hope one of these guys, do a story on it, or even the Good Glam Group releases numbers, because it would be great to get a sense of how have their acquisitions played out. And I know we guys are going to talk about it, but there's an article on the cap table, and a part of that article basically spoke about how the Moms and Momsco, which was acquired by a Good Glam Group last year in this like record-breaking acquisition where, apparently at a run rate of 80 crores, they were acquired for 350 crores or some like absurd multiple, and basically some absurd amount of money was sort of given out. Their performance has apparently dipped after acquisition. So, they aren't growing as well as per this article. I don't know how legit, or Good Glam hasn't commented on it yet. But I think really what needs to become more public is general performance of brands, especially their OG brand MyGlamm. Like, I don't even know how well or not well MyGlamm is doing. And I think once that becomes, more like available, it's easier to comment on how they're thinking, what they're thinking.
And there's also that entire piece with the Good Creator Co. and all the creator-led brands they've acquired, and how has the Dabu Ratnani calendar done wonders for that. There's so many things there in that sense of the word. As we move on to the next story, this feels like an episode of continuations. We will continue now on to what's happening with Thrasio. What's happening with Thrasio, Suchita?
Yeah, so, segueing into, and all of this is related, like it's almost like the first half of this episode is going to be on different varieties of house of brands. So guys, in case, for those of you who've been listening to Think Fast from day one, last year, everyone had their knickers in a bunch for like Thrasio this and Thrasio that, and oh my God, sab Thrasio hi ban jao. And the word house of brands was being lapped around left, right, and center, especially by founders to raise money. Ironically, Thrasio in the US has not had much luck at all. Thrasio, which is basically this like aggregator of Amazon brands, they had announced $100 million raise last year in April of 2021, and they were apparently going to IPO or like list through a SPAC. The SPAC idea started to take shape over the summer. The understanding was that Thrasio would be valued at 10 billion, but then things started to unravel. This SPAC / IPO never ended up happening. Their CEO has been kicked out or left at his own accord. Their CFO, in fact, left within 3 months of joining Thrasio. So, what's happening there is like totally sort of a black hole of sorts. Now they're undergoing significant layoffs. In their defense, not only them, but literally every second company in the US has been, cutting costs, especially in the form of teams. Basically, long story short, Thrasio, which was touted to be the next big thing, everyone assumed that their valuation would be closer to like $8-10 billion. There was this note that was circulated a couple of, weeks ago where apparently their valuation had come down down from 8 billion to 2 billion. So long story short, but this big bubble of like the great Thrasio and this great new model of house of brands has come crashing down. And the ripple effect of that is being felt by all the Me Toos that, sort of cropped up in India, taking a cue from Thrasio. And before we get into, general performance of Mensa, Global Bees and the likes, do you want to give a quick recap on, were you bullish on Thrasio, Me Too in India? Where were you at in the general spectrum of house of brands?
I was like 50-50, to be honest. I wasn't really sure the good and the bad of the model, in the sense, obviously, anything, I think the market requires aggregation at certain points of time, but the aggregation should come with better economics. And I've never really understood how this brings better economics, because in many ways you are acquiring brands which are functioning in different spaces. So that's always been my question about a Thrasio model, saying how do you kind of make, because the only way it works when you bring things together is that you find ways to kind of cut costs by making things common as functions. I've never understood how that would work in this case. But beyond that, I guess it's also like a trend to look at it. If you look at the fact that there are obviously so many brands out there, there is aggregation. What are you kind of bringing into it becomes a huge factor. You might take a point on 1 and 2, but 5 and 6 might actually do really well, which you didn't kind of bring onto your platform. So I still feel it's a little tricky. In some cases, maybe even building your own brands in some cases might be simpler than, or like even like taking a leaf out of Amazon's book, right? Amazon literally looks at the data of what's selling on Amazon. And you see a lot of Amazon-ish, their own private labels kind of coming up with those. So that's been my question. My question has always been, how do you kind of aggregate, and how do you kind of almost like loss-proof yourself for the ones you acquire?
I think the larger question that this begs, which everyone should be asking themselves, is the Thrasio of India actually just marketplaces? Because no one has deep proprietary customer insights, no one has deep proprietary distribution channels as much as marketplaces. Amazon, Flipkart, Nykaa, Purple, there are so many of these that exist. The only thing that matters at the end of the day when running any business is, what are you paying to acquire a consumer? And somewhere in the model of all of these Thrasio Me Toos, whether it's Mensa, Even Flow, 10 Club, Global Bees and all, somewhere the single point that they have to justify is, what is the differentiator that I'm bringing to the table for these brands that will bring down their customer acquisition cost more than others. And the truth is, the only way to really bring down CACs, you either have access to more consumers than any single individual brand combined, or the second is you have access to distribution networks that are, more unique and more robust than any single brand combined. And I don't think any of these guys have necessarily been able to do that. And just look at their portfolios, right? Like I was looking at the kind of acquisitions that Mensa has made. It almost seems like they've acquired like Myntra bestsellers. And the thing is, if you're acquiring Myntra bestsellers, like you're basically a service provider to Myntra then. Like you're basically helping Myntra's sales engines become stronger. How is that? Like, you know what I mean? Like how is that a business unto itself? And if you look at a lot of the, acquisitions that, for example, Mensa has made, whether it's, brands like Anubhuti, Ishin, Villain, maybe Anomaly, Karigiri, Lil Pix, and all of these other guys, you just go and check out their Instagram, man. None of these guys have significant number of followers. Like, for example, like I remember when Nykaa acquired Dot & Key, it made sense because Dot & Key, sure, it may not have been a big brand, but it has a cult behind it, right? Like if you open their Instagram or if you open their website and you see customer queries and you see customer reviews, the brand by itself has a cult. So, and similarly, not just Mensa, but if you sort of switch over to Global Bees and if you look at the kind of brands that they've acquired, again, just all across the board, man, they've got the Better Home, then they've got some jewelry brand, then they've got a home care brand, then they've got a nutritional and dietary supplements brand. And I don't know if you remember, but like when we had spoken about this, we had discussed Zara as an example. And Zara's biggest differentiation is that it only solves for apparel, right? Like every single infrastructural piece that it has been built out is only for apparel. But if you look at all these other guys, like their bets are all over the place. And if I actually had to comment on any one of these guys who's doing a goodish job, it would be, and again, prima facie without any access to information data, I actually think GOAT Brand Labs, like I think they have made some of like the more logical-ish bets. Like, for example, they acquired Label Life. Now, again, I don't know how well or not well Label Life is doing, and I don't even know what multiples it was bought at, but the Label Life is a brand. no one can take that away from them. They may not have the best clothes or the best shoes or whatever, but it is a well-known brand, right? Similarly with this brand called Abhishti, again, very well-known brand. I'll stop with my monologue over here, but I don't know, how do you make sense of such diverse portfolios? I don't know.
I feel at some point, so you mentioned Villain. I think that's a great example. Right? Villain's built by the same founders. The founders who built Beardo, built Villain, sold to Mensa. Now they're building Rene Cosmetics.
Yeah.
So you got to look after a few things, I feel, beyond just what the brand is selling.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned social media traction, so what kind of a community they have. And then also have a plan. Even if you are acquiring a vast set of them, just how can you put each of them into certain segments in your business? How can they kind of function together? You don't have a long-term math to that.
Yeah.
If you don't have that long-term math, it's just going to be a random set of brands you're going to acquiring. And even then, it's not like they're acquiring that many businesses. They're doing what? If I look at the article, right, for 25 businesses a year which is also not like a massive number. So either you're going super massive, you're going 100 brands you're getting in,
which is what Thrasio did.
But if
go wide and then hopefully one of 1, 2, 3 of the bets play out.
Yeah. But I think really going smartly by, is the product selling, the economics right? Does it have a community that's kind of built out? Almost those 3 things are super important. And then where does it fit into your business mix? As much as you might be in a Thrasio model, you still have to figure where it fits in with the other brands you have. If you don't have that, you're going to have trouble like this.
Yep.
Now, so we're going to get into a bunch of stuff around Spotify and podcasts and Snapchat. But before we do that, I know we have to take a break. So we'll take a break and we'll be right back with Think Fast. Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Duggirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcasts website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Welcome back to Think Fast, where we have our first double-decker story after a long time. Double-decker because we both pick stories which are connected to each other really nicely.
Isn't
but I'm
that some weird sort of sexual innuendo?
Is double-decker a sexual innuendo?
Jealousy,
no, that's sandwich.
Search? No, I swear. No, sandwich. Bro. I am telling you, this double-decker is some
anything can be a sexual innuendo.
Shit. Yes, Varun, and usually all of these come out of your mouth only, perv. We have an old uncle perv. You are
Please,
actually becoming
I only
the
watch
old
Sanskar channel,
uncle.
okay? I don't do anything.
Of course, on OnlyFans.
I'm OG subscriber for Sanskar channel.
Of course you are.
But nevertheless, while poor Jealousy has to search if the double-decker is a sexual innuendo, you want to talk about what's happening with Spotify in India, and then I'm going to tap into how the influencer podcast space is really grown as well. So
I love guys, can we just take a moment to appreciate how systematic Varun is being today, guys. Everything is so nicely
vadas. It's all the vadas. The vadas.
Dude, please eat vadas before every episode and send some my way too. But I know this is going to be your section, the same way House of Brands is my little pokey thingamajig that I'm enthu about. But podcasts, and general all things audio, I think you're the best candidate to speak about this topic with. But to cut straight to it, guys, so Spotify in India has apparently been growing fairly well and fairly steadily. In fact, their CEO, Daniel Ek, recently, in an earnings call spoke about how Spotify sees a huge opportunity in the near future in Southeast Asia, more specifically India. The audio streaming service platform added 16 million monthly active users for the quarter ending March 31st, taking its overall user base up to 422 million users. And of course, the revenue's been growing. So I think the great thing that, seems to come off of this article is, unlike Netflix, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Spotify and Netflix launched in India more or less at the same time. Spotify's strategy seems to have really played out, right? Everything from pricing to their advertising mix. Guys, if you haven't seen Spotify's new ads, please go check them out. Really, really, really well done. VD, have you seen them? The one where, someone's in this complex situation, there's a song playing in their ear So really, really well done ads. Pieces of the puzzle, and as complicated as a market as India may be, they seem to have made significant headway. They seem to have, played off of major tailwinds and jump right in. Are you a Spotify customer? I'm not, but are you a subscriber?
I'm a major Spotify customer. I flip between Apple Music and Spotify, but I I've used Spotify way too much, and I go through multiple catalog things across it. But actually, I'm weird. I listen to like 3 to 4 different podcast apps because I like to sample how they're all functioning as well. Well, that's my problem.
That is weird.
But what Spotify's been doing well is that if you look at the time when they came in, and obviously there were players who were already doing stuff, right? You had Geo, someone who was doing something.
Yeah.
You had Apple Podcasts, which is around, but even till now, they still don't have an India focus at all. I think they're finally getting someone in. Whatever the grapevine I've heard from is they're finally hiring someone to look at podcasts in India. But again, Apple's moved super slow in this space across the world, not just in India. But what Spotify's done right is they went about their acquisition strategy very smartly. They've done a few things right, if you ask me. One is that they've tapped into popular names really well. So we look at some of their podcasts that have done really well. They've tapped into popular names and figured what they can do with them. They've really also looked at creators who are doing shows well for them. Like a Mantra created, Bhaskar Bose for them, did really well as a fiction series. Now I think Mantra's doing 3 to 4. He's even doing the new Batman adaptation. They're doing Batman Unburied is a global series for them. There's a Hindi version of that, which is Batman Ek Chakravyuh.
Oh my
which Mantra is directing for them. And again, the voices they get again are well-known voices. So they've done that, but they've not stuck to one language. They've gone Tamil, they have Malayalam, they have across the board, they've got enough languages in there. So their acquisitions have been smart in terms of the shows they've got. And they've also gone after really like smaller indie ones as well. I mean, if a podcast is doing well, the chance of Spotify sometimes just reaching out to you and acquiring your podcast is also high. If you look at it, I think initially, like all platforms did, I know JioSaavn initially had a lot of shows, they done a lot of acquisitions, went full Bollywood there. Here it's been smart. Nothing seems to have been extreme high budget or over budget. They've been smart with just the numbers that they've invested into shows.
Like, give me a sense, how much would they pay? Like, how much would they, you know what I mean? Like, Joe Rogan, they paid $100 million. What's like the most that you can imagine?
That's internationally. I don't think the India numbers are even close to that in any way. In general, if you are selling your podcast to a platform like Spotify, I don't think you would make anything more. And this is just me, like, I have no like actual numbers.
Yeah.
You can make anything between 50 grand to 5 lakhs an episode. Just depends on the cast. I mean, I'm guessing that voice actors pieces couldn't require it to go higher towards like a 4-5 lakhs. But again, I'm just being very broad in that sense in terms of the span of it. But it's just the number of episodes you kind of get. It's also about the reach they kind of give their own original podcasts. But more than anything else, it's a lot more seamless to what the consumer really is looking for.
Yeah.
Like I've ended up kind of consuming a bunch of their podcasts, which are their own originals, because it just popped up on my feed. I'm like, this seems interesting. Let me try it out. And you later realize it's a Spotify original. And so I guess that's really worked for them. That whole like moving towards the Netflix-ish model over time of having their originals and scaling that up in the Indian context has really worked. But what if, from just an outside perspective, how do you see this?
So I'm not a Spotify user because in case you guys forgot, I use a YouTube Music. Don't laugh, yaar, guys.
But you have an iPhone now. You can use Apple Podcasts.
Oh my God, yes, I am leveling up slowly and steadily. That said, my husband has a Spotify account, and Spotify's playlists are always the best. And like you correctly said, I think the experience that comes across even to me when I open, their app is just how multilingual they are, and you can't escape from that, in a country like India. But I want to take this to also double tap on, another conversation we were having about how even within the general universe of audio and podcasting, influencer-led podcasts have been a big win, right? And a lot of this has actually been a part of Spotify's key strategy, not just in India, but even internationally. So talk to that, Vidi.
The MythPat podcast is a great example. One of the acquisitions they did was super interesting, right? Which is like they got MythPat on to do his own podcast. Now MythPat has never done a podcast. Obviously, like one of the biggest.
What is MythPat?
So MythPat, Mithilesh Patankar, if I remember the last name right, one of India's biggest streaming content creators.
Achha.
He does really fun videos, and like I wasn't a consumer of his content till he came on Advertising is Dead, and he basically takes gaming footage, but he does voiceovers. Like he does like all kinds, everything from like a Amitabh voice to a Shah Rukh voice. Like if Shah Rukh was in the middle of Fortnite, what would that be like? And stuff like that. So it's super fun. It's random. People watch that and like it's quite funny. So he started a podcast, which is very unlike what you would expect, but it's been in like the top 2-3 since the time the podcast started off.
This guy is popular. 11,000 followers on Twitter.
I was doing an online interview. I was in one of those panel discussions, and the panel right after that was supposed to be MythPat. My entire panel, the comments from the crowd were, "Where is MythPat? Where is MythPat? Where is MythPat?" And at some point, we're like, "Guys, main jaun kya abhi?" This is what happened eventually. But they also like got in, for instance, they got if I remember, I think the Khurana sisters, again, creators who started off What's Up Sister as a podcast. They also did a syndication deal with the Ranveer show where, unlike a Joe Rogan deal here, they syndicated it where he gets to kind of still have the content on YouTube, but the audio comes first on Spotify, I think 48 hours before it goes live across all of the platforms. So, but actually, no, before the video goes live on YouTube. So they did a lot of these shows with creators. You get reach through their own online following in that sense. And where it really helps is because discovery is the biggest problem for podcasters across the board. If you have a creator who already has a following, then more than anything else, it really helps you tap into that as a platform. I think that's going to be the trend across the board.
Yeah.
The difference between this and what some of the other platforms have done is they went after Bollywood. Whereas here, Spotify largely went after creators. I think that really paid off.
But that seems to be the thumb rule over here, right? So, for example, like Quibi, which is that, now dead 10-minute video streaming service that had launched early on in the pandemic. Their biggest issue was they just went after Hollywood and very, very popular Instagram creators. But if you look at any platform, even if you look at something like TikTok has its own creators, and the creators are proprietary to TikTok itself. And I think that's what's been interesting. I mean, they also have done wacko things like paid Michelle and Barack Obama shit ton of money for their podcasts.
They're not renewing the deal, by the way.
Which makes sense because as lovely as the podcast were, I really liked the one that Obama did with Bruce Springsteen, but so niche, and then they also paid Prince Harry and Meghan Markle an absurd amount of money for their sort of podcast. So I think somewhere from the looks of it seems like they've decided to follow where users are actually going, which is more up the alley of, podcasts like Call Her Daddy and the likes, and building their own creators versus outsourcing the job of creation to someone who's popular on, 20 other platforms. So 100%, I think that's a great insight.
I think what the other insight might actually be is that at some point, if you are a digital platform, you might get more value into tapping into influencers with even half the reach of a celebrity.
Yeah.
In many cases, because if the celebrity just has a following because they're a celebrity or if they're an actor or a movie star, it might not translate to you actually listening to their content or actually doubling down on that. But on the other end of it, if you are deeply engaged with the creator, part of the community, you will actually go across to this. One of the most interesting insights we should know about Celeb Podcast is there is a creator, and I will tell you his name because I have it open here right now. There's a creator called Triggered Insan. Okay. Now, there is a podcast called Triggered Insan Storytime, which is always in the Spotify top 5, top 6. It wasn't started by Triggered Insan. There's a random dude who has picked up Triggered Insan's content, has made it a podcast and keeps sharing it.
What is Triggered
Spotify
Insan?
Can't take it off because unless Triggered Insan comes and complains, they can't take it off, right? Because these guys putting it up legitimately.
But who is
unless the actual
Insan,
person comes up. Triggered Insan's a creator.
Oh, on what? YouTube?
YouTube.
Holy shit, I just did a quick Google search. Triggered Insan Nischay's monthly income is more than 25 lakh rupees.
Exactly.
What am I doing with my life, guys?
Welcome to the creator world.
Oh my God.
And my last point, which actually clubs across both of these, they've also been very blatant about what the shows are about. So for instance, you have a show which is a horror show. It's called The Horror Show. So what you search for horror, you get it. They have Lisa Mangaldas doing a show about sex. It's called The Sex Podcast. It's very straight up. This is what you're getting
Varun's
from this
favorite
podcast.
So, listens to it at least
yes,
twice a day.
I think Lisa Mangaldas is super interesting. The way she's kind of taking content around sex and really putting it out there.
Of course she is. You're a pervy uncle.
This is not pervy content. This is very relevant. People need to know this content.
Okay, cool. Now that I've troubled you enough, let's get to the last story, which is Snapchat.
Last story of the day, which is about Snapchat. Are you on Snapchat? Since you're not on Spotify, I don't know if you're on Snapchat.
Yeah, I am the worst. I am only on Pinterest. So no, I'm not on Snapchat. In fact, I can't even navigate Snapchat. I think Evan Spiegel is a legend, and what he's done with his company and that he chose to not sell to Facebook is literally one of the best decisions I have seen play out IRL. So big fan, not a user. You must be using it, pervy uncle, to stalk 13-year-olds.
So I actually use Snapchat for the lenses. I find their AR lenses to be the best just from like a user standpoint, while Instagram's lenses have gotten a lot better in recent times, I'd say that Snap's still far ahead on that front. It's super interesting to go onto Snap because I use it like a camera app. It's actually great
to take
you
selfies.
Get the most out of for selfies as well as normal photographs. The Snap camera actually has the best like calibration. I take a lot of selfies. I admire myself all the time.
I can't.
I take snaps of myself.
Oh my God. Oh Jesus! Major midlife
I'm like,
crisis
let's take a selfie
here.
pose.
Okay, so basically, Snapchat is great for selfies
and lenses, right? The AR lenses, etc., which are used. But from a Gen Z and like Gen Alpha standpoint, it's an app which they're super deep into because they use it for for chat, for kind of conversing. So that's been their core piece. And everybody always assumed Snap's focus was to become bigger than Meta or Facebook. But what's been interesting to see, they're pushed into hardware while the spectacles they made, great product, still not enough data to say if that actually has a market need or is it really selling and stuff like that. But what's been interesting to kind of see on this front is the fact that they've gone now they've launched a drone, which is the Plix drone. But in both these cases, it allows you to take, it's not tied into their ecosystem only. So it doesn't mean that if you take something on spectacles or on the drone that is only going to work on Snap, you can download it natively onto your phone, which means you pretty much are tapping into how everybody else is creating. And because you have this entire Gen Z and possibly Gen Alpha as your core consumers, you're making yourself into a company that is, weirdly enough, and there's a great Quartz article about it, but how you're a blend of Meta and Apple. Like at a point of time when both Meta and Apple are seeming like established players, they get a little more boring in terms of how when you look at them. These guys seem to be working towards the future, while they might not be selling as many of the hardware, but the fact that they're consistently doing this and putting it out there, at some point of time, it is going to pick up and it is going to become a thing. So it's super interesting to see what Snap's doing. Again, from a non-user perspective, what do you think about this?
I think the one big respect that I have for Snapchat is they haven't deviated from who their user is. Their user's always been Gen Z and like minus, right?
48%.
Exactly. So 48% is what, under 18, right?
No, 40% is Gen Z.
Which is like under 18, under 21 now.
I think under 21 now.
Yeah.
We're all old now.
And anything that they do, which I end up, obviously reading about, may not be a user, but I end up reading about, everything seems very aligned to that, generation. And if you remember the very first episode we did when, we had spoken about metaverse, like my first thing was Snapchat was there first. I just think they understand this consumer and this consumer's mentality much better than Facebook, Google, Meta, or whatever else. And I think that is what is Snapchat's big differentiation, which is they take a type of user and a type of like demographic and they go all in, versus what a lot of other folks have done, tying it back to even the conversation we had about Glamm, where it's so fragmented, it's difficult to make everyone happy, right? Snapchat's picked the TG that it wants to make very, very, very happy and delivered on exactly that. And I think the other thing that Snapchat's been able to stay out of the public lens, like I don't know if you remember, but Snapchat in its earlier couple of years got into a lot of trouble around, privacy and data and this, that and the other. And there was a lot of complaints about, harassment happening and naked photos, this, that and the other being leaked on Snapchat. I think what they've also done is they've taken feedback and implemented that feedback very thoroughly into the way they operate, because you don't see those kind of, aggressive complaints or, crazy sort of like press leakages happen the way it did before. So this is a company that doesn't just understand its consumers. It also seems like they take feedback very seriously and bake that feedback into, customer experience.
I feel what it also kind of talks, if you look at it interestingly, is the fact that even how they're building the products, it's very built for that audience. Like the drone, for instance, it's not like a 4K camera. It's a 2.7K camera. It's a little easier to use. It's not as expensive as someone who's like, slightly more professional, slightly at an age where you want to buy something more expensive is there. So it's for that audience. So I think even how they're building these, in many ways, I feel they're trying to understand the consumer and slowly get them to look at them, not just as a software company, but now they're a software and a hardware company. So we never know. This might be the Apple of the future. We just haven't seen that one big breakout product coming out on the hardware front. But the day that happens, I think we'll look at it in a very different light.
And with that, the end.
And with that, with this calmness and this chaos of this episode is almost over, but we're going to take a short break and come back with our recommendations.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcasts website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.
Welcome back to Think Fast. It's been an interesting double-decker, triple-decker, many-deckers wala episode. And we're going to finish this one off while I hear my daughter scream in the background because she's come back from playtime. What are your recommendations for the week?
I have a great show that I have to recommend. It's called The Flight Attendant. It's on HBO Max. So please put your VPNs and, HBO and pay for HBO Max because I think their programming is some of the best that at least I have come across. But The Flight Attendant is a brilliant show. Kaylee Cuoco, who used to be in Big Bang Theory, that's what she's best known for.
Yeah.
She has crushed it in this show. It's just exceptional. A total nail biter. Must watch Flight Attendant.
My recommendation is actually an interesting podcast I found yesterday. It's called Not Lost. It's a travel podcast, but unlike regular travel podcasts, this is basically the audio reporter and his friend have just decided to go from city to city. It's obviously scripted to a large extent, but it's just so fun because literally the episode starts with these guys get into the back of a cab and they're like, we're just going to be recording in the back. I hope you're okay with that. And you can hear the ambient noise. It's one of those, right? They go to Montreal in episode 1. They're going to go to another city.
Oh, nice.
They're just randling up in people's houses. It's so raw in the way it's been treated that it's a lot of fun. So check this one out. It's a lot of fun.
And with that, is it the end?
We are done with this episode. I was a lot more, oh my God, I said double decker and I was just going to say I was a lot more perky in this episode.
I love the way Varun has been rebranded into Pervy Uncle. I am thoroughly enjoying this, man. Sending you for liposuctions in some episodes, branding you as Pervy Uncle in another.
3 months before I'm 40. 3 months to go.
Oh my God. Over the hill.
Yes, over the hill. Then I can get myself a cane. I was gifted a cane when I turned 30. So I don't know what people are going to give me when I turn 40.
Oh, you must
Wheelchair.
Look out for the goodie basket I send your way. It's going to be hilarious.
Amazing. I know what you're going to send me. I already know what's going to be in it. Boner meds.
As do our listeners. I am so predictable. But with that, guys, toodles my poodles. See you next week.
Toodles. Guys, bye.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Advertising is Dead, Piyush Gupta, president of Keystone, talks to Varun about how his experimental marketing agency is helping brands get on the metaverse. On Voices for Water, Karthik is joined by Dr. Anju Gaur, senior water resource management specialist. Together, they navigate the landscape of Indian water data. On Pulyabazi, Pranay and Saurabh dig into why exactly the taxes on petrol are so high. On Ek Chuski Finance, Priyanka tells us how we can avoid taking a financial risk. And on Marathi Khirkitun, the Deshmukhs explore the beauty of the Devanagari font on the occasion of Akshaya Tritiya. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're following this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth is one of our biggest, most helpful things you can do for us. We'd really appreciate that. And also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening on. And you can also check us out on YouTube. Go check out ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. You get a list of all of our YouTube channels there. We're also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and the advertising on the network. We would really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. This really helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors for this week, SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh, and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.